Welcome to Implement This with Microsoft Business Solutions MVP Britta Rexted and co-host Matthew C. Anderson, where we have an insider's discussion around the things we consider when implementing Dynamics 365. In today's episode, sponsored by Analogic, Britta and I discuss cascading rules for relationships in Dynamics 365 and model-driven Power Apps. Maplytics by Analogic is a market-leading certified for Microsoft Dynamics 365 geoanalytical mapping app. Maplytics empowers users with powerful map visualization and routing capabilities within Dynamics CRM to drive better sales, improve business processes, and engage the right customers at the right time. Maplytics now works with Dynamics 365 version 9.0 and Dynamics 365 app for mobile and tablet. Analogic is a leading Microsoft Gold Dynamics CRM ISV delivering best-in-class Dynamics 365 solutions, as well as cost-effective and high-quality programming services. We thank Analogic for their sponsorship, and now, on with the show. And now we're back with another episode of Implement This. Hi, Britta. How are you?
Good, Matt. How are you doing?
I am doing fantastic. I hear you might have a story for me today.
I do. So this story is about Cascade Rules. There's this rule once you start doing public speaking that everything you learn the hard way, you have to tell as part of penance for having messed it up. So this was very, very early in my consulting career. I was new to Dynamics, and I was doing some part-time contracting for another company in the same industry as my full-time job. And we had a day that there was absolute panic. And there was panic because somehow in the dead of night, some mischievous person had reassigned every task in the entire system to the receptionist. Bum, bum, bum. It's very upsetting. Also, we didn't know who had had the task before, so sorting out 50 people worth of tasks that were all assigned to someone who was not going to, it wouldn't make sense for her to do them, was a nightmare. And so at first there was the whole assuming of like, who did it and why, it gets very finger pointy. Why? The madness. And then we figured out that cascade rules are a thing.
Okay, so
what was interesting in this company is that ownership was irrelevant. The whole company of 50 people could all see all of the records. We weren't using ownership of accounts or contacts to really mean anything. There were lookups to specific users, so you knew who served in what role for taking care of that customer. Mm-hmm. But ownership was irrelevant in the way it had been built. And so cascade rules were all set to the default, which the default would be, if a sales rep owns the account and they leave the company and you reassign it to the new rep, that new rep should inherit all of their stuff.
Yes,
so their tasks and their contacts and everything that belongs to that account should all move to the new person. Well, if ownership is irrelevant, and for some fun reason that's still unknown, someone decides to change ownership around in mass to accomplish a short-term need, all of a sudden hundreds of tasks just magically appear on the wrong desk, and everyone freaks out. And I had never really had to think about it before. It was set up before I got there. I had no idea what cascade rules were. I was totally over my head, and I learned the hard way. So now I have a rule. I refuse to take responsibility of any implementation that I have not personally started looking through the cascade rules, because they can be such an issue. They are
at least doing a little investigation.
A little bit. I think you have to, if you're going to be at all important or at least responsible for the outcome, you have to know what the security impacts are, and you have to know the security or the cascade rules. And so let's talk about what they're supposed to be and then why sometimes you might not want that.
Yeah.
So where have you seen cascade rules? Because you have worked in a lot more traditional sales implementations than I have.
Sure.
Where have cascade rules been really valuable to you?
Yeah. So, kind of tearing things down to the bare bones of cascade rules is, as you operationally are using just a CRM system of some sort over time, a lot of opportunities, leads get created, and there are related records to those that, based on security model, you want people to be able to see those other related records in many situations. And, a very easy way for that is to have like an individual sales rep own all of those associated records for the account that they're responsible for. So they own the account. They should be able to see the opportunities. They should be able to see any leads associated to that. They should be able to see any activities, associated through that hierarchy and so forth. So, as people turn over or maybe move to a different territory or get new accounts assigned to them, they should be able to go and have those things be visible to them, and having that happen automatically just through the sheer nature of like, oh, the sales admin has reassigned those records, and then everything nicely and neatly flows along with that. Like, it can be a very very useful tool in that way. However, in the reality within an organization, there are lots of little exceptions that you don't necessarily think of early on. Yes, all of those opportunities should be visible to that next salesperson. But if you're trying to do anything like, say, historical reporting of who closed what deals and when, well, you don't actually want all of the opportunities to move over to be owned by the new sales rep, assuming you are doing your reporting off of the owner field. A nice little easy way to do that. But if things are going to be reassigned later, you need to have that visibility. It's like in your story, the activities that got assigned away and you didn't know who had them before. How do you go back and recreate that? It's a mess. You hope that you have a report that somebody ran and exported at some point that you can go back and reference and task somebody with, either very manually or hopefully finding some sort of easy way to go back and reassign those, or you ask people to go find the things that were theirs and take ownership back of them. So and it's all based off of kind of this inherent assumption inside of some of the core entity relationships inside of Dynamics that cascading for, say, opportunities, there's this concept of a parental relationship. Every relationship inside of Dynamics has a certain relationship behavior. One of those is a parental relationship, and what that's going to do is it's going to cascade any of the changes that you're making in that ownership or in your sharing and so forth, or assigning, sharing, unsharing, reparenting, deleting, and merging. It's going to do all those things for the child records as well. If you do it from the parent, that's an awful lot of automation that people, in the real world of how you run an organization and how you communicate around records, that's maybe not the best assumption.
Yeah.
I have yet to find an organization that for, specifically accounts and opportunities, things work that way. Maybe for activities, they might care, they might not care as much. But that parental behavior in that relationship type, it's not a good assumption. You have to challenge that one, especially as an admin or as a consultant. You really need to give that one a long, hard look. Unfortunately, there are other options that are available to you as far as what that type of behavior in a relationship should be. So, swinging the pendulum the other way, Britta, I guess the answer should be that everything should just be pure referential, right? Yeah,
that's what I stick to. I like things being referential. Well, there's some, like the one I have pulled up on my screen right now is actually notes. The relationship between accounts and notes. I think that one actually, if the account changes, I'm okay with things moving around. I mean, that one feels like a pretty clean parental. I don't have a lot of notes that are, need to be different than that. But I usually like things to be configurable, cascading, and I do want to have some control. I tend to...
Yeah, let me be clear. I was totally joking about making everything referential. For those of you who may not be familiar like that.
Pick up on the subtlety there.
We'll circle back to that, but go ahead.
So our option here, and I would say question everything, configurable cascading is really, I think you should... in most cases, you're going to want to look at that because, for example, it might be that assignment, you do want to follow things along with assignment, but deleting, I'm that consultant that's always really hesitant about delete. I almost never give anyone delete privileges, especially bulk delete. Bulk delete freaks me out. Maybe I'm just a mistrusting person. I don't know. But delete is so hard to reverse and so difficult to go fix that I don't want my users deleting, and I really don't want them cascade deleting so that they delete one thing and then there's these ripple effects all throughout the system. So that's really hard for me to go back and fix later. Other things are, it depends on how your organization uses it. Some organizations are really into sharing and some stay away from that. And those sharing situations can get really complicated really fast. And so, you may just not lean on teaching your users to do a lot with sharing, or maybe you do, but thinking about share and unshare rules and the configurable cascading, that transfers a lot of things. Another thing you have to think about is all the other actions you do. It's not just the user clicking a sign. It's when a workflow changes something. How many things is that workflow actually changing? If you have all of this parental cascade rules on an account, and then you have a workflow that changes the ownership on an account, how many records are you impacting with every time that workflow runs on a record? It could be astounding. Yeah.
And, I think we mentioned this a little bit earlier, but I'll bring it back up again, is the potential reporting impact on those things when you consider that workflow could be making some of these changes and then having that cascade. If you are reporting on ownership in any way, shape, or form, or if you have things that are based on views where records are shared out with people, and it's a kind of a very explicit sharing that you're expecting only certain records to have been shared with them, you could end up with a lot of additional extraneous data that then either they're worst case not aware of, or best case just having to kind of sort through and figure out how to filter that out when they're running their reports. It is one that has come up more than once and has led to the question of, do we decouple reporting on these things from the ownership field? And that's a tough debate, because there's a lot of good advantage that comes with that owner field, but there's also a lot of drawback when it comes to things like this, and also the owner relationship is a special relationship, and so forth. So that can be an interesting and somewhat sticky one as you go through that.
Something similar to that is modified on. Too often I see gamification tied to modified on, and so many things modify the system that just because a cascade rule means that child record got touched, quote unquote, this week, doesn't mean that a rep actually worked it and that customer has been well cared for. So we got to be really careful that we're not assuming just because there have been changes in the system, and there's even this distant ripple effect from a record far upstream, that means that we're doing our best in the care and keeping of these records, and that they have actually been attended to and looked at. So same as owner field, I think modifying on is an even more overused and probably should be contemplated better. If modified on really, because most things trigger a modified on change. And so is that actually something reportable, or do you need to be more specific on what actually happened and triggering activity, scoring points, rewarding people, punishing people, anything like that, modified on, especially in something like this, can just change things. Or even if you're looking at just, you have a whole bunch of activities on just that social pane on a record, and we've got cascading changes, that means your modified dates they're all going to be modified, and now they're not necessarily in order. So if you're sorting things based on modified date, now everything on that record has the same modified date, so now things aren't in order anymore. So it gets modified on is kind of squirrely sometimes.
Yeah. No, and they tie together, especially since this is something that's not out there in front of you. It can surprise you, like your overnight scare of who went out and did this, who would dare go in and intentionally modify all these records. I mean, people don't even know they're doing it.
Yeah.
And this is one of those things where it can be a problem that's sitting out there that you don't even know that you have. If you haven't paid attention to what that relationship behavior is for some records, and that goes in the for the out of the box entities, whether that's sales, service, marketing, or one of the other out of like all the entities related to out of the box capability. there are these potentials for you to just, kind of not know how that is, good or bad. And it's that expectation of how the system is going to behave. And this one, I don't know anybody who has, been around, kind of in the consulting space who hasn't run into someone being just completely floored by this, or, every client running into it in at least one place where this has, bit them for not paying attention to it. So it's definitely one you've got to be thinking about it.
Yeah. And the nice thing is that it is kind of a fix it and forget it. You can come in brand new in implementation, get the Cascade rules right, and then move on with your life. This isn't something you have to do every quarter or go back and update. They're kind of philosophical, and unless there's a major change in the way the company sees something, or a major change in sales process, or a merger or an acquisition or something, you're probably not going to have to change these. So they are something to lock yourself in your office and get them right, and then not have to stress about it anymore.
Yeah.
Something I think I'd like to cover a little bit is this idea, if we're going to do cascading, because there are perfectly good reasons to do it.
Yes.
We have a lot of defaults around Cascade All, but I think things worth looking at, instead of just doing Cascade All or Cascade None, which, is maybe a little extreme on either end. We've already covered a little bit Cascade Active. You might just want to move the active opportunities to the new rep, but leave the historical data alone. Another one that is interesting is Cascade user owned. And this also helps with that activities scenario where the rep may have some of the tasks, but it's perfectly reasonable in a team-based environment that there are many people in the company who have a task about that account.
Yeah.
Or they have a phone call for that activity, or they have something else around
Absolutely.
it. And so user owned also helps cushion the blow a little bit of, hey, I'm going to move your stuff. So, which that does make sense. If you have someone taking over the management of a record, there's probably related stuff you want to move too. And that is more reasonable and a little less scary than going the all or nothing route. Yeah,
no, that's a great point. And, I think when that option is available for some of the sharing and unsharing, I mean, frankly, for the implementations, I've worked more toward the, medium to enterprise scale of implementation. Anything where you're automating additional sharing of records, I tend to shy away from it. So, maybe I would lean toward more the Cascade None on some of those sharing ones. One I would like to talk about a little bit is the delete relationship behavior, because this is one that I really, while I do share a certain amount of hesitation in giving people the right to delete things, if you are going to give people the right to be able to delete a record in Dynamics, using the relationship behavior on delete and what the what that cascading relationship is going to be can be a way to help protect them from themselves with some of that. Specifically using the restrict capability within that relationship behavior. So what that would mean is, like, let's say somebody has the permission to be able to delete an account for whatever reason that is. But you want to make sure that if they're going to delete those accounts, that there aren't any opportunities associated with that account anymore. That maybe it's a situation where an organization has moved and you base accounts based on a physical address, and you're going to delete that old physical address, but you want the kind of information history or active deals or active service cases to go to that new physical address. By having the restrict delete in there, if they try to delete the account while there are still opportunities, cases, and so forth regarding it, you are not going to be able to delete that. So they're in kind of protecting them from themselves, and that's one where on the delete, especially, like, the Cascade All is potentially very scary, because it can potentially wipe out a lot of additional records. So yeah, just wanted to give a plug there for, how it can be used for some good or to help protect the sanctity of the system.
Yeah. And the idea is that, we're trying to protect data integrity. We want things to move. We want things to be cohesive for users. We want things to be easy. And so, there are some nice opportunities here if you use them well. I think you just don't want to make assumptions. This is an area that you just can't be doing that.
Yeah. So, Britta, we've talked a lot about this, and I feel like we jumped right in, like with the story and into a lot of the murky detail here. So, for some of the listeners who may not know, like, where do we actually do all this stuff that we're talking about?
Yeah, great. If they want to actually implement this, what are they going to go do?
Yeah.
So to make any changes here, you need to go open the solution, whether that's a specific solution or the default solution, and go in and see what we're looking at here is in the relationships area. So you have one-to-many relationships and many-to-one, and you'd go look at this specific relationship, knowing that some relationships between two entities, there actually might be several listed here. Like if you look at opportunity out of the box, opportunity and account are related many times. There's several unique relationships, and you'd actually, in most cases, you'd be configuring. You have to make sure you find the right one and you configure that one. Other is going to be more simple. Account to note, only one, but it does get a little more complex. So you go in and you open that specific line in the view, and then that's going to give you the relationship behavior sectioned out. The very bottom of that relationship is where you'd go to first change the type of behavior if you needed to configure that cascading, and then it lets you go through each individual permission, like assign and share and unshare and reparent, and decide for that action what you want the cascading behavior to be.
Yep. And just a quick plugola for episode 19, where we talk about kind of building relationships, creating relationships in Dynamics 365. We touch a little bit on cascading rules for I think 30 seconds. It's not a whole lot out there, but we talk in some greater detail about that relationship form, what it is, things that you should be thinking about as you go to create relationships, beyond just kind of the cascading rules and the effect and impact of those.
Great. And then one last thing before we close is that you're going to find that some of these, especially the out-of-the-box relationships, you don't have as much control as you might have wanted. It's not you. It just is that way.
Yeah, it's a good point. There are some, especially when you look at the core, workloads, sales, service, marketing. They have, kind of specially placed, what's available and how much control you can have over those. You can still make quite a few changes, and I haven't found myself in a position where I've really felt in a bind on what could be done, but a great point there.
And I've usually been happy with it. They've erred on the side of caution. So it's not usually that something I can't change is so open and so cascading. It's usually the other direction. So I've always been happy with it, but just know you are going to see some that are grayed out that you can't change. And
I think this is implied, but for anything where you're looking at an out-of-the-box many-to-many relationship, there's no cascading concept. It's not there for a many-to-many.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. Great. I think that's it.
All right, let's wrap it.
Good.
You've been listening to Implement This with Britta Rexted and Matthew C. Anderson. Do you have a business problem you'd like us to discuss on the show? Reach us through our website, implementthis.org, where you can also subscribe to the podcast. We're on Twitter, too. Britta is @MacGyverCRM, and I'm @MC Anderson. Thanks so much for listening.